you inhabit them and you use persona poetry, I think you can't help but notice how human they are. And that's what really led me. So I have lots of people to thank for kind of getting my manuscript together. It's not a book yet, but it's ready to go. And I really appreciate all my first readers. Some of you are here tonight. And also the Telluride Historical Museum is the bomb. I mean, they're really, really incredible. And they are who first alerted me to this woman named Lizzie Daly, who was a prostitute at the time of her death. And I do like to sort of note that because she wasn't a prostitute. You know, she was a child, she was a daughter, she was someone's wife. She was someone's wife at the time of her death, actually. She was so many things. And I think for me to really sort of try to inhabit her voice, I had to see her in all of those things. I don't think when she had thoughts, she thought, well, I'm a prostitute and I have prostitute thoughts. No, I think she was just trying to survive and go about her day and make sense of what was happening, or get high or get drunk, and to sort of deal with it. And so it's been really fun to try to figure out who she was. And I think that the most exciting poetry for me, even though I do write contemporary poetry and I do write flash fiction and essays, my sweet spot has always been historical poetry. And I think because there's so many ways into it. So as I said, the Telluride Historical Museum had found her grave. And the thing that happens so often to prostitutes, people who worked labor, who didn't read, who didn't write, who were, native, they didn't get their story told. And so the fact that the Telluride Historical Museum showed me not just one, but 3 separate newspaper articles about Lizzie Daly, that she was actually written about in the press, that she was buried with a headstone, was like, it was incredible. And sometimes things are misspelled and you can't always accurately find people, but all of a sudden she sort of emerged. And so I had all kinds of questions. I was able to stand at her gravesite and kind of talk about what we knew of her, but what we knew of her was very vague. And so I'm going to read my first poem because I open and close the manuscript with erasures. And for those of you who may not know what an erasure is, it's a found text. So in this case, it's a death notice in the paper, in the Telluride paper in 1915. And I'll read it, and then I'll tell you what I did with it. So the first thing I want to read to you is, so Telluride, Colorado, 1915. This is not my poetry. This is straight from the newspaper, just to kind of get you into who we're going to be talking about. Died of peritonitis. Lizzie Daly, a woman of the red light district, died at her home on East Pacific Avenue yesterday afternoon about 5 o'clock after suffering for the past 2 days from acute general peritonitis. She went by the name of Louise Dickerson in Telluride, and nothing much was learned about her. Lee Worley, who took charge of the body, got into communication with her father, J.W. Shing Shang, at Terre Haute, Indiana, this morning, and upon advice from him, the funeral will be held here on Sunday afternoon from the Congregational Church, and interment will be at the Lone Cone Cemetery. So without the benefit of the other 2 death notices, and I was instantly trying to figure that out. What is general peritonitis? Why did her father not want the body shipped back? Why was she going by a different name? And so these questions lead you into sort of discovery. But so the erasure that I talked about sort of looks like this. I don't know, can you see it? So there's just a few, I've made the text very light. And so my erasure poem is, after suffering, the body will be held. And that's my intention through the manuscript, of holding the manuscript and holding, or I'm sorry, holding her body and treating it as humanly as possible. So I'm grateful for James at 20 Bellows for including this poem. And it's a little bit long, but it kind of gives you a story about. So Jack Dempsey was in Telluride around the same time Lizzie was. Were they together? Probably not. But he was an anchor for me. And when I looked at his historical record and I looked up, anything that I could find about Lizzie, including her ancestry, census records. I mean, I looked everywhere. Researched what Terre Haute, Indiana was like in 1914. All of these things. I found Jack Dempsey, and I felt like, work is work, prostitution is prostitution. But what if she fell in love? What if they both found each other? They have so much in common. After the fighter. After I ran my fingers through his thick black curls, he was like a found pup. He'd worn me down with his apple-colored sweater, with his empty pockets and shiny raven's eyes. He was our dishwasher when he wasn't mining or training the mule skinner Malloys. After I told him, I saw the same sort of hummingbird we had in Terre Haute, here in the wilds of the San Juans. He found me days later, both hands behind his back. Pick one, he coaxed, and in his south paw, he held a tiny nest, almost a thimble in his open palm. After he placed it in my grasp, I was dumbstruck, could not look him in the eye. Nestled inside the tiny space where shells once broken, pasted back together with his enormous fingers. After a week of rose water and candied violet gifts, after boxed chocolates and long plumes for a new hat, it was this rough-hewn fist of twig and grass, the fine silk of spider thread binding this home of hollow blue, that felled me to weeping. All my plans unhatched, a cup so empty in my hands. After a year or so, I saw him again, and he'd filled out. He was a real fighter now, and had a little ring not too far from the parlor house. Big Billy, our madam, was still bigger than he was, and never let him throw out any of the degenerates, afraid he'd hurt a fellow too deep. Jackie was like a raging cock in a fight, no time to block, jabbing to the point of exhaustion, and me in my corner of the sporting house, flitting, lighting nowhere for long. After he walked me halfway home, we sat outside, talked on and on as the night wore thin. He told me about preparing the skin for slap and impact. He said the smell of brine and lard he used to condition his face had a trace of his mother's Mormon soup, comfort welling from suet. After a beat, I talked of heading south, of the stores I needed for a hard winter. We laughed at the way we both never missed a meal if offered. I led him around back and up to my room. Birds of a feather, you and I said, and traced his dark lip. Both of us sing for our supper. Finally, after we ran out of words in the weak hours before the stars melted into day, we fell into the familiar clutch and breath lovers have known for centuries. And after a spell and once still, breath caught, ragged and muffled, after the small of my back ceased its pulse and eased into linen, we circled the bruises and the scars. Under our night-shadowed skin, we traced broken bones and throats uncut, hearts yet beating. Thanks. So I was really struck. Jack Dempsey also had a pseudonym. He Well, his original name was William Harrison. And Lizzie, you know, had these names. She was Lizzie Daly. She was Louise Dickerson. That's who she was known in town. And she was also born Elizabeth Shing Shing. And so there were so many parallels, you know, these bodies that were just used and sold, really, and used for survival as well by themselves. And I just thought they made kind of a great couple. So I could read one more that wasn't in 20 Bellows of the two of them together. He had a sister apparently in Durango who was a prostitute. I found that out a little later. So I think maybe he had a soft spot in his heart. Or actually, maybe I'm just going to read one about her that sort of, actually, before I do that, can you see if I share my screen? Can everyone see this?
We should be able to.
Can you see it, James?
Not
I don't
yet.
see it.
No.
Mm.
Present now? Should I touch that button?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'll do this. Now, do people see the image? I was just going to show you her gravesite. Can you see it, James?
I cannot. If you want to send it to me, I can put it up.
Oh.
We can circle back.
We can circle back. We can circle back. Okay, so one of the places that I went was Museum of the West, because sometimes I feel like objects are so great when, oh, something's happening. I'm presenting my screen.
There we go. Now we can see.
Okay. Oh, that's Big Billy. This is moi talking in my terribly ugly town. Isn't Telluride hideous? This is our Lone Tree. This is Lone Tree Cemetery, and this is me going on and on about Lizzie, and that's her grave right at my feet. So one of the things I couldn't do when I first heard about her was really understand it all. And so I went to the next best thing. I started painting about her. And so I would do sort of a semic writing. And when I was sort of absorbing all the information about Jack Dempsey and Lizzie's story and researching, I just kept painting about her, and I kept writing her name over and over in cold wax. It's cold wax and oil. And so these are just a few of those images. This is a piece called Under the Blanket. So sort of under the blanket of snow. I was obsessed by the avalanches and what she must have felt like coming from Terre Haute into this wild world. And her name is all over this painting, Elizabeth Shing Shing. So anyway, just a few images. This poem, I was looking at objects in, can you see me again? I'm not sure what you can see now.
Your screen still a little bit.
If you just want to click stop presenting, it should pop you back up.
Okay.
Mm.
Voila. There I am. Okay. You heard me talking about it though, right?
Yeah.
Such a technical wizard, me. You're welcome. So when I was at the Museum of the Old West, I was looking at like boxes of cocaine drops, looking at just all of the objects of the Old West, and I think that sometimes is a way into the poems. So this, in the turn of the century and up till about 1915, morphine, cocaine, opium, all of those opioids were hugely addictive, of course, like they are now, but you know, not just prostitutes were addicted. Women of the day, they were in every pharmaceutical that you could get at your corner drugstore. So if you had a toothache, you could very easily be prescribed or just go down and buy some cocaine drops. So this is a poem more about Lizzie than it is about Lizzie and Jack. Cocaine drops make the memories real, stirred in glass and down the hatch. This is how I leave my body behind. I leave their yellow teeth and red silk lampshades. I leave the undoing of my spine, my jaw in unfamiliar grip. I leave my neck exposed and wrenched to the side. I leave the muffled player piano and its wind-up song. I watch my dress bunch and come apart seam by seam, weft unraveling from weave. Fray, frayed, afraid, and fraying. I leave my body behind. I mouth the words and find a city on the ceiling, a watermark. It's the low country on a map, flat and dry. I've slowed down time, and yet I make time to dash. There's a portal. I've created an escape route where language is used and reversed. Fuck me means fuck you. My lover, now long gone, appears in the bleary glaze of the man above me. Don't get hooked, they say, but romance like ours was ahead of stars. He was my brave fighter. Where his sleeves hung once, there were wings, and smooth, shivered skin plucked of duck down. My heart was made of quick bellows. When we united, my tongue married the liquid rush of quicksilver light. My thirst slipped down my throat the moment I tasted him. Conjuring makes miracles of mirage. It shouts over the rocky carriage of endless jolts and puncture. Snow biting through drafty doors, rough men spilling seed, but the memories always fade, and I'm left again in this body, left behind in the lonely, sobering smack of dawn. So, there's so much that I learned about her and I learned about Jack. And so maybe I'll just read another poem and then talk about it after that. This, she was the oldest of 7 children. And so I knew, being from Terre Haute was actually the Sin City of the Midwest. It was insane. Terre Haute, Indiana sounds extremely boring to me, but when I pressed and I really looked into what it was like at the time, it was insane. They had bordellos that were called bagnos, or sort of like Italian baths. And I think that may be where she got her start. When her mother died at 14, there were 6 babies in the house, and I can't imagine what that must have been like to be poor and to have Terre Haute, just down the rail lines, and just the drugs that were available, a pretty girl, and wanting to escape just poverty and whatever else. I imagine that she probably wasn't very literate at the time. She didn't have time to go to school, and so yeah, this is a poem called Crash. I dream of every vice but men. Gold, caviar sprinkled on toast, strawberries in winter, white roses wreathed on my winning hand, happy dust, piled deep as snow. I dream of the very first bagno in Terre Haute. Over and over I disrobe for a tall camera, the headless man in a suit, nameless under a cloak, 5 legs, 1 blinking eye. How many hands have touched my image since then? Grimy thumb over my naked likeness, over my smile. I dream of grub stains and ragged nails. I dream of pinky rings and blue veins, dark and light palms open to my sepia pose, hair unfurled in autumnal curl. The lifelines and love lines turn into a web of rail lines, turn into a tightrope holding me. The suspended above this country, such tangles taut under my young skin. I dream of one bordello after another, a maze of doors and red-lit halls, brass knobs and wooden portals, legs and lace, hands reaching from behind curtains, cloaks, and faceless crowds. I dream I can run, plaited hair undulating like reins. I dream there's an amber meadow, lemonade in a cut glass, catching sun, ice chips, my mother in a cane chair. She sets down her bowl, her string beans, the rag rug below her feet. Her lap is ready to receive my impact. But then she sees buttons bursting from my dress, the wind opening wide, exposing my breasts. She throws up her arms to shield her face. I can't stop. I can't stop. Mother, I want to cry. Brace yourself. I can't stop. So a lot of times women had their picture taken maybe once or twice if they were in the prostitution trade, and they were sort of calling cards, looking very glamorous. And I have a feeling she got a calling card when she was in Terre Haute. She had her picture made. But she was married 20 months before she died. She was married in Terre Haute, and then she was found dead of acute peritonitis in Telluride 20 months later. So I want to be careful of time, and I think we're almost at 25 minutes. But it's I just wanted to give a little taste of, you know, what searching for Elizabeth Xing Xing was like.
If we could just give her a round of applause real quick, and then we'll take some questions. I think the thing that I'm most impressed with your work, and that we shared some conversation with, is the amount of research that you've done and how deep you went into all these back channels to find her history. And I think it's very sad and very difficult content to write, but the research is such a inspiring process to sort of resurrect somebody who didn't have a history. So with that, if anybody has any questions, feel free to come in. We can read some that came in. We have a couple, or I've got some scribbled down here. So I'll open it up.
Thanks, Jesse. Jesse said she wanted to.
I just want to say that when you see your work on the page, you do a wonderful job of using negative space and word spacing for flow. Even reading it, it feels almost like Dempsey is moving across the page himself, as if he were, you know, boxing in the match through the way that you've laid out the words. And that's something that I really appreciate and try to do more of in my own writing. So when I saw that come through 20 Bellows, I was like, oh, this is just beautiful, just the way that it flows. I'm just a big fan of that. And then also the way that your poetry, you utilize that space to make sure that it still has that poetic element to it, but it really does read like historical nonfiction. And it's, you feel like you walk away not only the pain and beauty of it, but really understanding who the people are, and having that balance is like something that I'm not able to do, and I really appreciate it, and it's inspiring. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks. That's so nice. Thank you. Yeah, there's a couple more in the Dempsey section where he is kind of, you know, moving. But I can't read it all. Thank you.
I have a question, although it's not really much a question as a comment, but so I'm a huge fan of historical fiction. It's like just my favorite. And you know, I think this idea of historical fiction as poetry is really interesting. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I think it's fascinating how you weave actual facts with creative license in your pieces. And I wonder if when you're writing, are you thinking about whether or not the elements of the piece are true or your creative input on it? Are you hearing the audience and wondering, I wonder if they'll think this is really the historical facts are part of the creative piece?
Well, I think that's the beautiful thing about poetry, right? Is that you get poetic license, that it has to be emotionally true, it has to make sense, but it can't, but you can combine Jack Dempsey and Elizabeth Daly that are not in the record together, but they were in the same place at the same time, going through similar things. And I think that that's poetic, but you're using historical fiction or you're using history, I should say, to inform the poetry. So I think that it's the most fun. I'm starting to write a memoir now, and like being completely accurate all the time is like making me sweat a little bit.
That's actually a great lead into a question we got with the registration form, which was basically, how do you manage your time? You've got a memoir going, you've got a manuscript, you've got research, painting. So the question we got was, what do you feel is the best way to manage your time most effectively, writing every day according to a strict schedule or writing when you can?
Oh, I'm very strict with my schedule. Not. I feel like to live a creative life, you have to keep switching it up. And when I started painting, it was with beginner's mind. I have a little bit of art background, and did a lot of art in high school, not as much in college. Dabbled in lots of artistic pursuits, but cold wax was an interesting layering effect. I kept seeing all these collages in my head when I would think about Lizzie and her past and the houses she lived in and the wallpaper. And I was just thinking of how thick the canvas would be with all of these collage elements. And then I learned, oh, there's a thing called cold wax where you can just paint oil and kind of scratch into it. And I thought, that's what I'm doing. I'm creating a palimpsest, where there's something there and it's been partially hidden. And I feel like Lizzie has been there all the time and has been partially hidden. And so it was a way to be creative while I was doing research. And so it's about juggling to me. And if you can cheat on yourself with other creative endeavors, you're still getting shit done. Is the way I see it. It's just, you're just switching forms. If I'm hiking, I'm also like walking in a rhythm, and sometimes I speak into my phone some sort of lyric or story that I'm getting. If I'm cooking, I can listen to a podcast and be inspired. So it's just, I think it's about keeping it switched up and not giving yourself too many rules.
Are there any more questions right now? We can always circle back. She's not going anywhere, I hope.
I'm here all night.
Yeah.
With my whiskey sour.
I'd love to know more about, I try to stick to forms if I'm in like a nonfiction mode. I'll be writing a lot of nonfiction at that time. If I'm writing poetry, I'm writing a lot of poetry. So tell me about how you can like switch your brain from going from this like very intense kind of like historical like fiction poetry project to like a memoir that's like grounded in like very real things that are happening to you. Like, what does that process look like, and how do you separate it?
Well, I think I'm lucky now that I'm not a mom of young people, or I don't have like a full-time job. A lot of my stuff is just kind of part-time here and there. And I feel like sometimes I can't process the heaviness of historical fiction or my own memoir. And so my outlet becomes something else. Like the other day, or I'll hear a story, like in my writing group, for instance, when somebody wanted us to write a letter to, to the state saying why we wanted our Christmas tree recycled, because we have this huge forest Christmas tree. And we were like, is that going to go to waste? And so my writing friend said, can we all write letters to make sure that, once they've harvested this huge, beautiful tree, can we please can we please make sure that it's recycled and that its life wasn't in vain? And so I was like, I don't want to write. I've got so many things to do. And then I was like, it's a metaphor. It is a metaphor, a Christmas tree with all of this, you know, baubles and lights. That is a used up whore. And so Lizzie watches the oldest whore in town kind of be treated like a castaway Christmas tree, you know, on December 26th. So I think that everything is always informing it. And I make absolutely no rules about what I'm doing. I just write and I just talk into my phone and I'm just sort of open to whatever's happening. You know, I'm not sure when this memoir will be done, but when you're an intuitive writer instead of a strict writer, that's just the way it happens. So, yeah.
Okay, well, if you want to follow along on all these numerous endeavors that Kierstin has going, she does have a website, KierstinBridger.com. And if you're comfortable with it, we can patch people to you if you want to reach out, and we can connect you if you have more questions or comments or just interested. We will connect you. But thank you so much for being here. We are going to do a quick raffle that I am hoping will work. I have a wheel with everyone who registered, and our next poet, we have 3 of her books here that we are going to raffle off. So we'll do one now. We'll do one when you do your Q&A, and we'll do one before we leave. So I have a copy of Play on Words, which is R.R. Noell's poetry collection about idioms of the English language. So I will spin my automated wheel here if I didn't lose it. There it is. All right. And it is Jessie Randall. She here?
Lucky me!
Yeah. And Jessie is actually one of our contributors at 20 Bellows. So thank you for being
Hey.
I forgot
I'm
to
also
mention.
a librarian, so that book may get, you know, depending if I'm willing to share it or not, it might go into the Colorado College Library. So that's always a plus, I think. So how do I get it?
I will get these in the mail. You might have to get a different copy because I'm actually having these signed before
Awesome.
so these will be signed. But congratulations. We'll do another couple as we go on, but that is a good transition to introduce R.R. Do you prefer R.R. or Rachel?
You can call me Rachel.
Okay. And actually, I'm really thrilled to have both Kierstin and Rachel here tonight because they have been 2 of our most vocal supporters since launching in March. Rachel was actually our very first submission that I was just thrilled because I'll read her bio here in a second, but has an incredible following, has an incredible body of work, and is just constantly doing stuff. I'm very impressed. I was thrilled that you're willing to submit your work to us since we're so fresh. But I will just jump right into the bio. R.R. Noall is a world traveler, a tattoo collector, a wine drinker, and a writer who pets all of the dogs. Very jealous about that. She's the host of Poems for People, which is a poetry podcast, and she's a college English professor in Denver. She's also the founding editor of From Whispers to Roars, an indie literary magazine based here in Denver, which, by the way, don't let me forget to let you do a plug for your news that you have coming out with that. But she has been featured by Drunk Monkeys, Litero Magazine, Chaleur Magazine, Genre Urban Arts, Range, CEO Lit Mag, and a number of other publications. So at this point, I will hand it off to her to do her section of this. But again, we will do another raffle, so stick around after that.
Well, hi everyone, and James, 20 Bellows, thank you so much for having me. And Kierstin, that's a really hard act to follow, so thank you. I was like taking notes over here. I'm like, I need to make some adjustments, you know? But like you said, my name is Rachel Noall. I've been in Colorado for 5 years now. It feels like forever ago, and then I should have just like been born here, but that didn't happen. So yeah, I'm from Cleveland. But I came out here 5 years ago and was, like most of us, like stunningly captivated by everything that Colorado has to offer. And that's something that really permeates my writing. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about like writing and pushing boundaries. And for me, this 2020 was a really big year. I had a big year. It was great. I loved it. But I had a couple of poetry collections come out. Two of them. But I'm constantly trying to, and something that I really enjoy is I'm someone who I like to work with teams. I'm a collaborator. And I think the one thing about poetry and one of the biggest misconceptions about writers in general is that there's not room for collaboration. And that's something that just like drives me bonkers. There's still this like very romantic notion that writers are like brooding in a dark room with a candle and like, and like, I know that's funny, but when I tell people I'm a writer, they're like really? And I'm like, yeah, really, and there's still just this, it's so romanticized. That being said, I've tried to find ways to kind of break down this barrier between people who read and people who write. And I kind of started doing this in 2019 with typewriter poetry. So kind of a funny story. In my bio, you probably noticed that I'm like down for anything. And I got this email in 2018 from this woman that was like, hey, Rachel, I got your email on your website. I see that you're a poet in Denver, and I'm like wondering if you do typewriter poetry at weddings with a typewriter. And I was like, well, I do now. So I bought a typewriter. I have a 1962 Smith Corona. It weighs about 60 pounds. Don't come at me when I'm holding it. And, I rolled up to this wedding in 2019 and did live typewriter poetry. And, I knew I could do it. I tend to like work fast, and I'm a lot about like making connections with words in my brain. But that was the first time, the event went really well. The couple was wonderful. It was two women getting married, which like swoon because I'm also gay. But it was so cool because all of a sudden I was like sitting down, and there's something about a typewriter that just like makes people like crack their chest open and talk about really personal things. And it was so cool because number one, people were telling me things that were so intimate, but number two, like I got to somehow, when something's written down in a way that's so like physically demanding kind of to write, it really, I think, like validates the storytelling and the experience. So typewriter poetry is now something that I've been doing for 2 years. Shout out to Michelle, that wedding planner from a few years ago, who like turned me on to that. But I'm around Denver and I do that all the time. I'll actually be at Sloan's Lake on Saturday during one of their neighborhood events. If you want to swing by, I'd love to see you. Write you a poem. But that's kind of the first way I started breaking down these boundaries, like these weird like mental boundaries that we have about creating art and like people seeing and experiencing it and reading it. And the second way I kind of bridged this gap was I was like, okay, like collaborating with people is so cool. How do I keep doing it? And I had, like kind of jokingly, and all my friends thought this was hilarious, capturing these like weird moments in my life when I like realized that I was a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I was writing these like hilarious haikus, and it kind of started as a joke. Like I would send them to my friends and be like, this is like about when I like fell in love with this girl on the playground and I was like 6, and my friends would laugh and yada yada. So I had this like kind of like little, I say like little journal. It was like a Word document where I'm like working on these haikus, and I was like, okay, like what do I do with this? Like, I don't, like, is my coming out experience that interesting, right? There are millions of people who are going through this around the world. Like statistically, 10% of people on the planet are somewhere on this like sexual spectrum. Like, how do I tap into this? So I, on a whim, kind of did a Kickstarter campaign for a project called Closet Haikus. And people contributed to the project, and they sent me a moment in their coming out story. So I think that if you're not a part of this community, coming out doesn't just like happen where someone like goes up to you and is like, yeah, I'm gay. And like, they're like, okay, cool. And like life goes on. Like, that's not how it happens, really. You know, and sometimes it's that simple. Like there are friends that I've did it and it was like that and it was that simple. And there are other processes that are much more complicated. Especially when you think about like coming out to yourself or coming out and then like being in love with somebody, like it's very complex. So I asked people to send me a snapshot of a moment when they were coming out. So out of like the 29 years I've been alive, I've probably come out like 1,000,000 times. So like one of those snapshots. And it was amazing. The project was fully funded for $2,500. Everyone who contributed like got a copy of the book. I wrote people poems. But then what I did was, so I took their coming out stories and I turned them into haikus. Thus, closet haikus. So I actually, I love this one. This is from a friend of mine who lives in Denver. And this was when she kind of realized that like, oh, there's this thing happening and I'm like recognizing this. Her name is Melissa. And this is the poem. The guru had it. Not just makeup moved me, renewed and whole. So these are just like little snapshots of these like experiences that people had. And then I also love this one because Christina and Taryn, who I wrote typewriter poetry for them at their wedding, that first time that I ever did it, they now, they follow my work and sometimes we grab beers, but they're great. But their haiku is written out or known, love is affirmed, unspoken, a balance that works. And the story that they had told me was talking about like how unique it was that when they came out and then they met each other, that they felt like they struck such a balance, you know, in their relationship. And I think balance is something that we're always seeking in our life. And so to have a partner that way, they just said was like so vital and important to them. And also surprising, kind of based on their previous relationships, which I love. And another person, so you could decide whether you want it to be anonymous or not, because obviously coming out is kind of like sensitive and people have their journeys. I do love this one. With a drink in hand, I stand before a large crowd and yell it loudly. Right, so it was kind of one of those projects where, again, it was so cool because all of a sudden I was breaking this boundary of like some random stranger on the internet asked you to contribute $1 to a project and now you're going to tell them about this like really personal journey that you've had. Like, whoa, humbling. And it's something that like I know that I haven't, and I know a lot of people like with platforms say this, but I feel like I have a responsibility because like there's all these people online now talking about this experience that they've had. But like when I was growing up and like an angsty teenager and trying to figure it out, I did not have those resources. Like Instagram was not a thing, you know, like YouTube was not a thing. So I feel really lucky that people, number one, trusted me to do that. And then number two, that I could create this project that I think provides people with kind of an incredible validation of like, here I am, here's my story. And like, there's all these other people's stories in here. And it's really cool that there's, you know, common ground, not common ground, but also just understanding that everyone's experience is so different. It still gets me every time. And I definitely want to do a version too. But that being said, you know, my work has changed a lot. I went through, the University of Denver has a master's in creative writing with a focus in poetry. I finished that degree in 2019, and it was something that really pushed my work as far as literally the boundaries of my work. I felt like I was a little bit stuck as far as just thinking about this as a practice and as a part of my daily life and as a career and what that meant. And there's so many questions, and being someone who's like, I do a lot of things. So it was like, how do I make this, viable and good for me as a creative person? I think sometimes we create stuff and we don't check in with ourselves about like what works and what doesn't. So, it really kind of pushed the way that I think about creating, and it pushed the way that I think about, again, collaboration. And it really, I started writing this collection when I was being pushed creatively with an amazing group of people. But then at the same time, I was like falling in love with the woman who is now my wife. Romantic love story. The coffee shop was full. I walk into the coffee shop. I ask if I can sit down. This girl turns to me and goes, "Yeah, fine." Well, little did I know that she'd been like scoping me out for weeks. And yeah, she's my wife now. But I had met this like amazing woman. We got engaged in Telluride. So like my life was changing in all these really amazing and beautiful ways. And I was trying to figure out like my sense of space. And I was finally at that moment where I was like, okay, like Colorado's my space. Like I found my human, like I know what I love to do. Like, how do I start to process this while at the same time I still have like 1 million questions because I'm 29 years old and I'm still trying to figure out what being an adult means, and that's hard. And there are all these other questions about careers and all that jazz. But anyway, the last collection that I had come out, it's called At War with Stars. I think it's my favorite thing that I've ever written. It's definitely a reflection of the master's program that I went through and of that period of time in my life. And I would like to read a few of these, but it's a lot about having a sense of place. And there are sections that are a little bit more dreamy, sections that are more grounded, but it's definitely rooted in Colorado, because this is where my first like big journey. I got done with college, moved out, decided to move across the country where I knew one person, and this is where kind of my life began as an adult. So this one is called Dreams. I jump on stars to breathe in the dust, to be punctured by orbital elements. Shards of space in my veins, I swim across the English Channel, propelled by my own blood in the water, baiting aquatic beasts. I wipe away the salt in my eyes as I climb the mast of a burning ship. No desire to escape, but a lust marrow deep to get to the top of the world before I fall. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm now in this mode where I like my life is great and I'm constantly waiting for like the ball to drop, the shoe to fall, all of it. And I think at the same time, I'm always kind of seeking out that next opportunity and that next, inspiration or the next experience that's kind of going to take it to the next level. But yeah, that one's a little bit more trippy as opposed, well, I mean, this one is too, so let's go for it. It's called Cage versus Safe. Cold echoes contained by metal, where you can see what you can't have, can't reach. Dark, door heavy, air sealed, preservation locked. A cage and a safe are two very different things. Heads for a prison, tails for a protector. What are hearts anyway, and how scared are you of yours? And I think, as I was writing this collection, I was thinking a lot about like marketing the collection. And creatives don't always like to talk about marketing, but as a creative who is a marketing professional, I think it's really important that we do talk about it. And, I think when I was writing this book, I was trying to come up with different ways. Like, how do I start engaging with this community and with like Denver about this book? And, you know, I had just come off of, I was voted top of the town author by 5280 in this year, which was like so badass. And it happened at the best time. I was actually in the emergency vet with my dog. We were camping and her face started swelling up. It was like this terrible night. Like we were, you know, and I had to rush home 2 hours to get her to a vet that was open. And I'm sitting in the parking lot because it was COVID and I couldn't go into the vet. I'm worried about my dog. And I get this text from my friend Allie that's like, Rachel, you're a badass. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like having a mental breakdown right now. And she told me this thing about 5280 and it made me so happy. And like, I think a part of it was like, how do I like make sure that I'm really like giving homage to Denver and to this place that has been like super welcoming to me. And I love this poem. It's about Cheeseman Park. And while I love adulting and new home ownership, I had this, if you know Cheeseman Park, I had this beautiful apartment on Cheeseman Park. It's on like the 9th floor facing the city, and I would just like sit out there and write, and that's like where this collection was written. So I spent a lot of time there, but this is Cheeseman Park. Maybe they walk among us, the ghosts who paved these streets, who made these rules. Maybe they speak in the wind or through unseasonable cold or in the currents of blowing leaves. As the trees above groan, they tell us to run or hide or beg to be forgiven. I walk on their grave every day, close my eyes, inhale their wisdom and feel nostalgic. But maybe I disrupt their sleep with pounding feet. Maybe I'm the one who haunts them. So I think, thank you. Thank you. I think about Cheeseman Park a lot. And I remember when I first moved to Denver, there, you know, you don't run through Cheeseman Park at night. And some people may still give you that advice. However, if you have a great friend and you're walking through at night, it's a weird, eerie spot. And like knowing its history, like every time I walked into it, like makes me feel very thoughtful. So I think too about like in what ways do we make sure that we're doing justice to these places? And like I'm always thinking about my like physical surroundings, and I think that has a lot to do with my work. And you know, I've been going down this kind of like nostalgic bubble. I'm working on a few poetry projects right now, but I am working on one called How to Grow Up, and it's about like being a kid in the Midwest. And this poem that Twenty Bellows published, that I'm going to read now, is definitely going to be in that collection. But I do love this piece, and this poem is based on this baseball field that I used to have to go to for practice. Make a right after the church, the place your cousin was baptized, before you hit the flashing light. If you miss it, you've gone too far. Gravel rustles, flies, canopies of branches camouflage the sky, already gray. Birthed from forest, you'll come to an empty field. The road goes to a split rail fence. Turn left. Continue 500 feet and you've arrived at your destination. I have gone too far often. I have turned in time too. So thank you. Yeah, so sense of place, pushing boundaries, kind of my gig right now. I'm also, my next collection, it's called I Made You a Playlist. I'm hoping that it will be out in the next 6 months, but it actually comes with a playlist because I'm trying to find more ways to, how do people not just like read my poetry or buy the book and like put it down? How do we continue to have these conversations? And so it will come with a playlist, and I think like a mini podcast, because podcasts are cool. But It's, you know, if you handed someone a playlist about like your heart getting broken, or if you handed someone a playlist about like falling into the best love or like something like that. So I'm working on a few things, but I'm always trying to find ways to collaborate. So if you're a poet who likes collaboration, or you're a painter who likes collaboration, you know, I'm working on some like mural projects and some things, and I'm always trying to add more stuff to my list just because artists are cool and I like to hang out with people. So if you ever want to do something like that, or just have questions about like marketing your writing or websites, that's like what I do for my job. So feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to be a resource to fellow artists.
All right, let's give Rachel a round of applause. I think personally, you need to get Kierstin up to Cheeseman Park and collaborate on the great.
Agreed.
I love collaborations. I love Cheeseman Park. I love Denver.
Oh, heck yeah. Well, I love Telluride, so.
Perfect.
I was hoping, I do want you to talk a little bit about From Whispers to Roars and what you've got going on there. And then maybe plug your podcast for just a second.
Awesome. Yeah, so From Whispers to Roars is another magazine in Denver. We have traditionally been digital and print. COVID halted that a little bit. I'm hoping that we start printing again at the end of this year, which would be awesome. But our the first issue, this was our fourth year in existence. So our first issue of the year is actually coming out tomorrow, which is awesome. And for once in my life, I'm not scrambling for something. So that's also awesome. So that's done. And I'm so excited for you to be able to sit back and enjoy it. But I tell people when they say, oh, should I submit to the magazine? I tell them that I want to read the stuff that is in a notebook at their bedside table that they want no one to read. So if that is your work, please send it to me. I would love to read it and I would love to share it. You know, we've built a pretty big platform in Denver and beyond. I'm focusing on this year doing more interviews with artists to just talk about the process. You know, I don't think we normalize the, you know, website building, the query letter, the outlining, the publishing process. Like, we don't talk about that enough in this space. So I'm trying to kind of get those conversations up and running for future issues and on the website. So if you would be interested in having those conversations with me, I would love to do that. And I also have a podcast called Poems for People. And it was, we had 35 episodes in the first year. The last recording was in early 2020 because COVID. Also, the podcast is unique because it has to be recorded in person. But what I do is, if you're in Colorado and you ever want to record this podcast, because COVID is now becoming a thing, hopefully of the past, I sit down and interview you. I call this a human storytelling podcast, basically. I talk to you about your life, where you are right now in this moment, the things you care about, the things you hate, the things you love, where you think you're headed. After we talk, I write you a poem in person on my typewriter. When I finish, you read it to the listeners. And it grew really fast. People love it. Again, something about the typewriter, but yeah, had a couple hundred people listening to each episode of the podcast, which was really awesome for a poetry podcast. Who knew? Poetry's cool. So yeah, if you want to binge some episodes of Poems for People, you can find it on Apple and Spotify and all that jazz. And yeah, I am ramping up, starting to get that going again. So if you are in Denver, or if you're into podcasting, you should check out this place called House of Pod. It is a professionally built out podcast only studio located in the Rhino neighborhood. It's run by a badass woman, and you should check it out.
Great. Well, I, at this point, completely forgot to do the second raffle. We're just going to do both at the same time and then jump into a quick Q&A. But I have both of the books that Rachel just read from. I have Closet Haikus and I have War with Stars. So we will do Closet haikus next. I don't know if you can hear my wheel, but it's really entertaining.
I kind of wish we could.
Windy Vidlock. Do we have Windy here? Nope. All right. Once. Okay. We'll spin again. What about Ann Schneider? Do we have Ann? She was here earlier. And these people got to stick around. Okay, one more time, and then someone's just going to get it. Colleen Gardner. Colleen here? She is here. I see her.
Heck yeah.
Maybe. She's on the list, so Colleen wins that one.
Cool.
All right. And At War with Stars. And these are all available on Amazon, Rachel, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're on Amazon. I believe Closet Haikus and Play on Words are also on Barnes and Noble. I think At War with Stars should be there at this point.
Beautiful. Marissa, one of my volunteers. This is coming your way.
Heck yeah.
Great. So at this point, you touched on a lot of the things that I was hoping to ask you about, specifically with regard to collaboration, and excellent. I know one of the reasons you and I talked about it briefly, just how much I appreciate how you seek to work with other people in your work and include others. But if anybody has any questions, otherwise I have a couple that we can throw out there, but I'll open it up. It's a quiet group.
Now, if you were my college students.
I think next time I'll just give you the power to call on people. Here's something that I was hoping you could talk a little bit about. You are very inspiring in your use of social media. It's always, you're active always, there's no long gaps, and all the content is just really great and it doesn't get stale. How do you manage that? It's kind of one of the things, like you mentioned, with the marketing that we don't like talking about as creatives, but you've broadened your reach so far through social media. How do you plan that out? Is it, something that you do on the fly? Do you schedule it? How does that process look for you?
I wish I scheduled it. I do not. I keep telling myself I'm going to. Seems complicated. and it's not that complicated. But honestly, everything that I write, unless it's an old poem that I've posted, is a poem that I've written that day. I think that's important for people to know, just because even if I don't dedicate a day or an hour as a writing day, I make sure that I'm posting a poem every day that I have written that day. So that I think is important just for my own accountability. And I like people to know that, there's content out there that can be recycled, and for sustainability, that is a wonderful thing. But it's good for me to be like, okay, I don't feel like doing this right now, or how do I freshen this up? Or it is raining outside, rarely in Denver, and how do I get a good picture of this? It's good. It keeps me on my toes. It's good for me. That being said, it's kind of exhausting, not gonna lie. Being an Instagram poet is exhausting. That being said, it's, because of that, that's the reason I now do the typewriter poetry thing. Guys, wedding vendors make a lot of money. If you want to be a poet who makes money, start doing like events like that. I'm serious. Like most like people say like great way to become like you know, it's cool to like get out there and show people that number one, you can like do something like this. And number two, like make money from it. Like I think that's badass. So if you can do that and you're up to do it, like do it. You know, I feel like I'll even say like in marketing, like I've gotten jobs because I'll be like, yeah, I'm good at social media. And they'll be like, yeah, but you have like an English degree. I'm like, yeah, well, go on Twitter and look me up. You know, it's a good thing to leverage, you know, in some markets as well. You know, that being said, I think that it is about creating a system that works for you and that's sustainable and that doesn't make you feel kind of like exhausted. So, you know, if you can post, do it. But mostly I love Instagram because of the engagement, because of some of the people that I've met on there. Like there's some really talented writers on the internet. There's a lot of bad ones too. But that being said, I think that again, it's opened the doors for like collaboration. It's opened the doors for like work opportunities. It's, you know, been really cool to find different ways to share, like with the podcast, like doing stuff with From Whispers to Roars. So yeah, I wish I was more organized. I'm not. There are tools to become more organized. If this is something you kind of like want to pursue, I'd highly recommend like Hootsuite. That's a tool where you can like schedule out like posts on Instagram or Facebook. You can even do like LinkedIn now if like you're looking at it from like a work capacity. But I think mostly it's nice to just like have the real world interaction. Like this gentleman like a few weeks ago reached out to me and he said like, because of your poems and because of like I've seen pictures of you and your wife, like you're so happy and you're so authentic. And like, I decided I was going to live my best life and like be true to myself. And this like 50-year-old man who lives in like Missouri or something. And I was like, I'm like sitting on the couch being like, damn, like that's really cool. Like stuff like that wouldn't happen if I didn't do what I do on the internet. So that's my internet spiel.
Personally, I think it's really refreshing to hear a creative person embrace that and embrace the marketing side and the business side of it. I think a lot of us come up through whether it's creative writing programs or spending too much time in coffee shops or whatever and have a really jaded view of some of that stuff, which is why a lot of people, I think, go to their grave with a novel that they wanted to write or any number of things that they regret. So I think it's really cool that you own that. Like I said, I was really excited when you engaged with us. And as my personal plug for the internet, I had to ask both poets tonight what names they preferred and how to pronounce their names. I'm sorry I said your name wrong because I met both of them on the internet coming in the door. It's such an incredible thing to hit launch on something and have two really talented people like our poets tonight come through the door, completely trusting that you've got good intentions, and we do, I promise. But so thank you. And I agree. I think there's a lot of good out there. There's a lot of bad. We're trying to be the good. So on that, unless anybody has any final questions, we're kind of bumping up against our time. Claire, we can't hear you for some reason. Don't know if you're muted. Yeah. Technical difficulties. Yeah, if you want to type it into the chat, I can read it out. Do you schedule goals for your writing?
I do. I think I don't say X poems per year. That would be a great statistic though, and I'd kind of love to know it. I will tell you, I probably write like thousands of poems in a year, and then I just pick the good ones. But yeah, you know, I'm kind of been on this schedule now where I like self-publish one book a year. I think that's really fun. I'm also working on a manuscript. It's a crime novel. I like dabble in nonfiction, which I never thought I would do, but I try to get a few of those published every year, so, I do think I have like spurts in writing as far as a schedule though. I'd say like I have one great day a week as far as the content I produce out of like all the days that I'm actually writing. Like if I collected all the stuff, it's like, okay, here's like 25 best things I wrote this week. That makes me happy just to have that, and then to be able to go back and reworkshop. Good thing about a master's program is that it teaches you how to kind of like workshop your own work, and then also like working with writing groups and stuff. But yeah, super helpful to be able to do that and kind of evaluate where you're at. I think it helps with the scheduling. Good validation.
I think just curious if you want to say a couple words about your experience with self-publishing. I think a lot of people might be curious about that. It's another one of those things I think a lot of people have been brought up to look down their nose on, and it's becoming more and more powerful. So I would love to hear your experience with that and how that's gone.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when I first started, I was one of those people that was like, why would you self-publish? There are publishing houses out there. There are poetry publishing houses out there. But I will say, after being in the game and talking to a lot of really good writers about what they do, my goal is to, ultimately be like pumping out a novel a year and be making money doing it. And that comes with, I think, a lot of learning. If you look at margins and sales and all that jazz, all the fun businessy things that creative people don't always like to talk about, you can actually make a significant more amount of money writing. And I know there are people out there who will say like, oh, but like you shouldn't think about poetry like about money. And I wouldn't say I equate poetry to like money making or view it as a business, but if I'm out there doing this, then my like initial viewpoint was like, why the hell not give it a try? Kind of thing. And honestly, it led me to a career. Like I own a marketing agency in Denver, and I'm the director of operations for another marketing agency in Denver. So I'm in this marketing world, and I know what works and what doesn't, and I've done a hell of a lot of research behind it. So if you do have any questions about self-publishing or just need resources, please reach out to me. It really is not that hard, and to start marketing yourself. And I think making like small investments in the really hard work that you're doing is really important. And yeah, I mean, I know that I've sold more like copies of this book than I would have if I would have like signed with like, Greyhound or like many like reputable poetry publishing places, but like they're great at publishing, great at sharing, not great at like marketing and making sales. And that's a generalization, I know, but if you do need resources or encouragement, I'm happy to chat with you.
And yeah, we are more than happy to patch people in with Rachel. Just drop us a line.
Yeah.
Last call for questions, and then I will do a quick plug and we will be out of here. Okay, well, I have so enjoyed having both of you here tonight. I was really excited to have you be our test subjects for this. Like I said, we're hoping that the virtual is on its way out the door. I'm with you. I think I'm very optimistic that we can be in person soon. Looking for venues, if anybody has any recommendations. As we continue to grow, we're always looking for content. If you know a creative in your life, our goal is to say yes to something, even if we have to kind of take a couple extra steps in that process. So tell your friends, tell your fellow creatives. We're always looking for new, fresh things. And it's not just poetry, it's not just short stories, screenplays. I talked to somebody recently who was curious if she could send in the artist's narrative for a painting she did. And I thought that was a really cool idea that I haven't seen in a literary journal. So I said, yes. And so anything like that, and just drop us a line anyway. It's been really cool getting to know a lot of people in the Denver area just through this. meeting up with them in person. And then as it's grown across the state, my car's got like almost 200,000 miles on it. I'm probably going to have to like rent a car to get to Telluride. So we'll see. But it's just been really great. So both of these poets tonight have been remarkable advocates for us. I hope that you will be as well after tonight. So with that, I'm going to let everybody go, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming, and we will do another one of these soon.
All right. Thank you, James. Appreciate you.
Have a great night, everybody.